So our next speaker is Bill Lauderback, and he is going to speak in the area of environment for us and get the facts about the drought. So I know we've all heard lots about it. It is all near and dear to every one of our hearts here in Austin, and affects all of us. And he is the Vice President for Public Affairs at the Lower Colorado River Authority. So Bill, I'm turning it over to you.
My presentation on my iPhone. And unfortunately, with respect to an iPhone, I'm not going to be able to show you all my little nifty moving graphics and things. Everything's going to be rather constant. So I hope you can bear with me, and I sincerely apologize for the technological problems that are entirely my fault. I've been asked to talk about this historic drought that we are experiencing here in Texas, and particularly here in Central Texas. We are about to enter the 8th year of this drought. We'll finish up this year, we're in our 7th year. And while we have not yet reached a drought worse than what we usually refer to as the drought of record, goodness gracious. I'm going to sit here and do my kids we're getting close. The worst drought on record since LCRA has been in existence for 80 years. We should note that another great woman of Texas history, Mom Ferguson, signed the legislation that created the Colorado River Authority 80 years ago this past week. And LCRA will actually celebrate its 80th anniversary in February, when the first board was appointed by Governor Ferguson and the organization came into existence. So let's talk about Texas for a moment. When we think about the Colorado River, many folks think that it's the same Colorado River that flows through the Grand Canyon. Actually, it's not. We have our, being Texans, we have our own Colorado River. And it flows from the southern part of the Panhandle down through us here in Austin and all the way down to Navigator Bay. When the LCRA was created back in the 1930s, it was created for the purpose of taming the river, because we were having enormous floods that were literally washing Austin away. And a series of dams were built on the Colorado River to create the 6 Highland lakes that we enjoy here in Central Texas. And 2 of those lakes, Lakes Buchanan and Lakes Travis, serve as our reservoir lakes. In other words, they are lakes that serve for the purpose of providing water to those of us here in Central Texas. The other 4 lakes, like the one we have here in Austin, Lake Austin, or Ladybird Lake, which is not actually one of the 6 Highland lakes, are generally referred to as constant level lakes. They're actually pass-through lakes, and they're not constant in their level, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But at present, our 2 major reservoir lakes, Lakes Travis and Lakes Buchanan, are only at about 34% of their capacity. They are very, very low. This is a photograph in recent months of Lake Travis. Now, one of the reasons that Lakes Travis and Lakes Buchanan are so low is that we are not getting the inflows into the lakes that we normally would experience in any given year. And our watershed, which is shown in the colored area for the Colorado River, runs from just south of Abilene to way out west below San Angelo. This colored area, our watershed of the Colorado River, is some 14,000 700 square miles. This is an enormous watershed, and as hopefully you can see, there are many streams and tributaries that flow into eventually the Colorado River. And this is where most of our water comes from for the Highland Lakes. Yes, it's great when we get a big rain bomb right on top of Lake Buchanan or Lake Travis, but it's just as important that we get rain in the hill country, because that rain eventually flows into the Colorado River and into our lakes. Now, this graphic, unfortunately, is one that had a lot of action on it. And what you're going to see now is simply a static bar chart, and it's very difficult to see, and I apologize. But what we're showing here is the inflows into the Highland Lakes for 2011, 12, 13, and 14. The big light blue lines are our inflows on average. And you can see the purple line is 2011, which was a very, very severe drought period. And then we go over to the green line, that's 2012. The kind of burgundy line is 13, and the most recent line is our months in 2014. And hopefully this will stay on for a second. This line is a normal year. These little bitty lines down here are this year. Our inflows into the Highland Lakes this year are actually worse than they were in 2011, which we all thought was a horrible, horrible year. We are in severe trouble with respect to the drought. Again, these are normal years. You can see a normal year. May is a really great month, as is October and September. Here's where we are in September compared to normal September. I apologize again for not being able to see the movement of those lines, but it is quite dramatic in terms of our historical perspective versus where we are today. Now, when we talk about the inflows into our two reservoirs, again, Lakes Travis and Lakes Buchanan, when those lakes are full, they hold about 2.1 million acre-feet of water. Anyone help us understand what an acre-foot of water is? It's a lot. All of us can take a really good bath with an acre-foot of water. An acre-foot of water is simply the amount of water it would take to cover 1 acre of surface 1 foot deep. And in terms of gallons, an acre-foot in round numbers is about 327,000 gallons of water. It's a lot of water. And these two lakes, when they're full, hold 2.1 million. That's about 650 billion gallons of water when they're full. And as we know right now, we're at about 34% full. Now, what we're experiencing has happened before. Contrary to what you might think, this is not Charlie Strong's electrocardiogram that we have. But rather, what we're showing here on the vertical axis is millions of acre-feet, and on the horizontal axis is going from 1940 all the way up through 2010. And the green line there is when the lakes are full, at about 2 million acre-feet. The little burnt orange UT line is average, and as you can see, the lake levels are never average. We're always rising and falling over the period of time. And you can see that first little red circle there in the 1950s that was during our drought of record, 1947 to 1957 drought. And what did you notice happened towards the end of that drought? Boom, it shot up dramatically, and it shot up very, very quickly. One of those is the 1952 flood that I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a moment. But what we see with respect to our history of drought in Texas, and particularly here in Central Texas, there's a reason we're referred to as floodplain alley, because it seems our history shows that we are either flooding or droughting, but we're never constant. We're always changing with respect to our climate here in Central Texas. Now the flows are very important not only for our Highland lakes in providing drinking water for those of us here in Central Texas, but the flows are also very important for the bay and the maintenance of the environment in Matagorda Bay. On an average year, the Colorado River will provide about 1.8 million acre-feet a year to Matagorda Bay. Last year, we only sent down about 570,000 acre-feet, about a third of what we normally send to Matagorda Bay. That's not because we don't want to send the water down there. We don't have the water to send it. When we finish up this calendar year, we're going to come in probably a little bit below 570,000 acre-feet getting into the bay. So not only does the drought affect us here in Central Texas, it has an enormous impact on our Texans in the Lower Basin. So why does all this matter? Well, if you live out in Lake Buchanan, that's why it matters. This is a photograph in August of Lake Buchanan. We're about the same spot today. We're at 680,000 combined acre feet versus what we should be at 2.1 million. So this is Buchanan, and you've been up to Lake Travis lately. This is Lake Travis. Those are islands there are called sometimes islands. Aptly so, because sometimes they're islands and sometimes they're not. But the drought is having an enormous impact here on us here in Central Texas. Now, if you water your yard, or if you use your air conditioner, or if you took a shower, don't drink the water this morning, regardless of your use, if you're living here in Central Texas, you're depending on the Highland Lakes for your source of water. Many communities depend on the Highland Lakes, not just Austin, but Pflugerville, Leander, Cedar Park, etc. When we talk about Austin, I'll divert for a moment. Austin gets its water from Lake Austin. And you may say, well, wait a minute, Lake Austin stays pretty level. That's correct. Lake Austin stays pretty level because we're constantly moving water from the Highland Lakes into Lake Austin to feed our thirst. In August, which is the highest month of consumption in Austin historically, because we're all watering our yard. Over 60% of our water use goes in Central Texas to watering our yards. We were consuming in August 525 acre-feet of water every day from Lake Austin. Now, think about that. 525 acre-feet times 327,000 gallons per acre-foot. If you do the math on your little iPhone calculator, we were consuming somewhere around 8.7 million gallons of water each and every hour in August. Just in Austin. We drink and use an enormous amount of water. So when you talk about the Highland Lakes, one of the reasons they're low is all of us. We are using an enormous amount of water. To get that water into Lake Austin and maintain Lake Austin's kind of constant level, we have to move water from the Highland Lakes. And when we don't have water coming into the Highland Lakes to replenish that supply, you have Lake Travis and Lake Buchanan looking like they do. The Highland Lakes are clearly a shared resource, provides water for over 1 million people. It provides water for 7 power plants capable of not been able to provide water downstream for agriculture like we have in the past, and I'll say more about that in a moment. But some of the water just vanishes. We often lose sight of this. We live in a very hot part of the state. It tends to be windy. The heat and the wind results in we lose about 160,000 acre feet every year from the Highland Lakes from evaporation alone. Mother Nature takes it. That's actually more water than we consume in Austin. We lose, so between the two, between Mother Nature's thirst and our thirst, you're talking about over 300,000 acre feet of water every year, just to stay even. So what happens if things don't improve? Well, there are three criteria that the state water plan recognizes that would have to be met before we would declare what is called a drought worse than the drought of record, worse than the drought of 1947 to 1957. The first criteria is that 24 months will have passed since Lake Travis and Buchanan were full. Well, we've long since passed that part. The second trigger is the prolonged inflow deficits into the Highland Lakes, all that water coming from all those tributaries, exceeds the drought of record. We are almost right there now. We won't know for sure for a couple more months when we continue to run our hydrology, but we are very, very close to our inflows into the Highland Lakes actually being worse than they were during the drought of record. Now you may say, but because of the population of Austin, it's even worse now because we're consuming so much water. That is correct, but remember in the 1940s and 50s, we were producing an enormous amount of hydroelectric power from our dams on Highland Lakes. We were moving water through the lakes every day at a pretty strong clip to produce electricity. We're not doing that anymore. We don't produce electricity using our hydroelectric dams except in periods when we have a lot of water and we're moving water through for flood purposes, then we're producing electricity. The rest of the time, those dams are holding water. We're not producing electricity. But we were back in the 40s and 50s, and we never interrupted agricultural supply in the 40s and 50s. So the two together were consuming about as much water as we here in Austin are consuming today because we were producing electricity and we were moving a lot of water downstream for rice agriculture. So the third trigger that we haven't gotten to yet is if the combined storage of Lake Travis and Buchanan are less than 600,000 acre feet. Remember I said earlier that this morning we were at 680,000 acre feet. We're only 80,000 acre feet above hitting that third criteria. If we hit these, and in the absence of rain, substantial rain, this month, February, November, December, January, we're probably going to be looking at a drought of record on around perhaps as early as February, perhaps March. And what does that mean? That's making an assumption we're not going to have rain, which we do think we are going to have a pretty wet winter. If we go into that period, then we will have to declare what is called a drought worse than drought of record. You will be required to follow your water provider, in this case the City of Austin's instructions. Each water provider throughout the basin will be asked to reduce their consumption by 20% versus a base period. Let me make something very clear here. This does not mean that all of us are going to have to reduce consumption by 20% next spring if we hit the drought record. The good news is, despite our consumption, we're actually consuming less water here in Austin than we were just a few years ago. We're already consuming about 20% less than we were during what is called the base period, and that's like 2010 through 12. So if we hit the drought of record, for us here in Austin, nothing's going to change immediately. For some of the communities downstream, they are going to have to start taking some pretty strong measures to cut back on consumption. But bottom line is, we hit the drought of record, then automatic curtailments kick in, and the community is going to be asked to reduce consumption by at least 20%. If the drought continues, and we go to say 500 acre feet, then we'll have to take even more measures. We're not there yet. I don't know if we'll be talking about a 30% curtailment or what, but hopefully we won't ever get there. Now, with respect to when will the drought end, that question is perplexing. It reminds me of a question that my daughter, my youngest daughter, who is a freshman at University of Alabama this fall, and she called with the question of the week Monday night to say, Dad, I probably shouldn't be asking you this question, but how do you get that wax off the top of that Maker's Mark bottle? It's Monday night. I saw her this morning on ESPN Game Day. ESPN is at the University of Alabama today for a Mississippi State game, Roll Tide, and my baby girl was on camera. Without her Maker's Mark. The question on when the drought will end is we don't know. None of us know. What we do know, though, and this is important, a lot of us say, oh, if we could just get a bunch of rain and fill that lake up, then the drought will be over. No, it won't. In 1952, this is Worts Dam above Lake Marble Falls. This is 1952, and remember Lake Marble Falls is one of those constant level lakes. Well, in the 1952 flood, Lake Marble Falls rose 19 feet above full. We had a lot of flooding. And yet the drought continued through 1957. You say, well, wait a minute, you had a flood. Yes, we did. The lakes went up and they came right back down. To end the drought, we not only need a major, I got 2 minutes, we not only need a major flood occurrence, but we need sustained rain over a sustained period of time to really end the drought. In 1952, this is Starkey Dam, which feeds into Lake Travis. On this particular day, Lake Travis rose 57 feet in 14 hours, and it came right back down. In the Christmas flood of 1992, we got within 3 feet of the spillway, and then came right back down. We need sustained rain for a long period of time. What are we doing? We have cut off water to our rice agricultural industry for the last 3 years in a row. Our board next week will pass a resolution sending an application to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality to request that we cut off water to agricultural purposes next year again, 4 years in a row, since we have sent water downstream to rice farming. We are also requiring homeowners and businesses to water their yards no more than once a week. Some contend they don't have that authority, but I'd like to see them try to prove it. We're also drilling groundwater wells, property we own in Bastrop County, in both the Lost Pines Park and the Griffith League's Scout Ranch. We have, we'll break ground next month on our Lane City Reservoir, which is about a 40,000 acre-foot reservoir down the lower part of the basin. You see the little red dot there. It will not be a constant level reservoir. It will be like our Highland Lakes, and we'll fill it and lower it. It should provide about 90,000 acre-feet of additional water. We're going to pump that back upstream? Well, of course not. But we will be able to use it downstream, and to the extent that we are not sending stored water from our Highland Lakes downstream, and we have water downstream in reservoirs to meet their needs, we're able to keep more water in the Highland Lakes. Who benefits from such action? Everyone in the basin, all million of us, the businesses, the power plants, etc. What can you do? Every drop counts. We're going into the winter months now. Our water consumption here in Austin will fall off dramatically. It already has begun to fall off dramatically. We are anticipating a wet winter and a cold winter. The El Nino that has developed in the Pacific around the equator west of our hemisphere should result in more moisture going north up into the Alaska area, catching the jet stream and bringing substantial more water into the central United States. We're very hopeful that that indeed will be the case. We were hoping we would get substantial rains in October. We did not. Nature didn't anticipate. But we do anticipate a wet winter and a cold winter, which hopefully will allow us to avoid having to declare a drought record. But we have a long, long way to go. The legislature convenes in January. We'll be taking up this entire issue of what is Texas going to do about its water. We have plenty of water in Texas. There's plenty of water in Texas. It's mostly in East Texas versus the rest of the state. And this whole issue of interbasin transfers is highly political, but it is one that at some point we're going to have to address for Texas as a whole. We're going to look at our state as a whole as opposed to regionally, and we're going to take a look at water rights, etc. So I hope that's given you a rundown on the drought. It's severe. We don't know when it's going to end, but we can't continue from a policy perspective to rely solely on Mother Nature for our water here in Central Texas. We're going to have to look at groundwater, desalinization, a lot of other things. With that, I will conclude a few minutes over time.